This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week, we welcome back Tony Havics. We're going to talk a little bit about surface protectants, a topic that is right on top of all of our minds right now, especially those who are managing buildings. Before we get started, let's stop and thank our sponsors. They are the reason we can continue doing IAQ Radio Plus. Our marquee sponsor is Instascope at instascope.co. Our association sponsors are the American Industrial Hygiene Association at AIHA.org, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists at ACGIH.org, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute at CIRIScience.org, the Indoor Air Quality Association at IAQA.org, the Restoration Industry Association at restorationindustry.org, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at IICRC.org, and Healthy Buildings America 2021 at HB2021-America.org. Industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories at AEMLINC.com, Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions at graywolfsensing.com, TSI Inc. at TSI.com, and Healthy Indoors Magazine at healthyindoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Terry Sofer Sr., who was first to identify Dr. Kurt Seamers as the original owner of the ship that brought the fictional character Vito Andolini to the United States. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, April 30, 2021, has been sponsored by TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for the monitoring of indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. Here is today's trivia question. Unlike other types of product labels, what statement must appear on EPA-registered pesticide labels? Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Cliff. All right, so today we're going to discuss some recent work Tony Havics has done on antimicrobial surface protectants in conjunction with a client who provides integrated facility services to more than 600 customers. Tony is an honors graduate from the Georgia Institute of Technology. His bachelor's degree is in mechanical engineering. He's a registered professional environmental engineer with over 25 years of experience in the industry. He's also a CIH and has volunteered on numerous AIHA and other committees. And he's also our IAQ Radio go-to guy for industrial hygiene and related topics. Welcome back, Tony.
Good to be back, Joe. Good to be back.
Always great to have you, sir. Hey, what we'd like to do is first, I want to set this up a little with Cliff, but before we do that, can you tell listeners a little bit about what led to the development of this paper?
Yeah, so I was hired by Cushman & Wakefield Services, and they had over 1,000 clients across the U.S. that they were doing work for in terms of their cleaning protocols as well as their general overall management for the buildings. And they kept on getting calls about what they should do with these potential surface protectants that were being offered to them. And so they came to me and said, can you take a look at the science behind them and help us fit into them groupings and ratings so we can decide which ones we might recommend and which ones we might not recommend and what for and what they couldn't be used for.
You know, it's interesting because there's a lot of confusion around this topic. You know, what has to be registered, what doesn't have to be registered, what's exempted, and so on. And My co-host, the Z-Man, has been dealing with this for many years, and I thought we'd go into a little background with him, kind of set things up. First, starting with FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. Cliff, what is a pest? I mean, FIFRA regulates pests. What is a
good
pest?
question. Well, according to FIFRA, a pest broadly includes any insect, rodent, nematode, fungus, weed or virus or bacteria or other microorganism on man or in other living organisms. That's their definition. It's pretty broad. And I think if we go off on FIFRA, what FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. And EPA kind of handles that both with product registrations and also on the enforcement side. So it's FIFRA that regulates registration, distribution, and sale of these products, in the United States. I think the next question, one that's most important, is we talked about what is a pest, and I think the next logical question is what's a pesticide? And with certain exceptions, a pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, mitigating any pest or intended use as a plant regulator, defoliant, desiccant, or any nitrogen stabilizer. And I know a lot of people in water damage, when they hear desiccant, they get all excited, but they have pesticide desiccants normally applied as dusts. And what they do is if an insect comes in contact with them, they kind of dry the insect out. So that's kind of how those things would work.
Now, lately with COVID, we've heard a lot about this treated article exemption. I wonder if you could tell listeners a little bit about that.
I'll give you the background and then we'll go into that. So what FIFRA does is they require the registration of any substance intended to prevent, destroy, repel, or mitigate a pest. However, the Code of Federal Regulations has an exemption, and this is called the treated article exemption. And this prescribes the conditions under which this exemption applies, and it allows certain materials and items to be registered as treated articles. So what a treated article is an article or substance treated with or containing a pesticide. And that purpose of the pesticide is to protect the article or substance itself. For example, paints might contain an antimicrobial to preserve the product while it's in the can so it doesn't smell, and also to maybe provide some antifungal protection, once the product is applied. Wood products are exempted actually from treated articles. Okay, the claims on these products are quite limited. You're limited to making a statement like this product contains a preservative, for example, fungicide or insecticide, built in or applied as a coating only to protect the product. And an example of a legal claim would be antimicrobial properties are built in to inhibit the growth of bacteria that may affect this product. Oftentimes, I'll also have to say the antimicrobial properties do not protect users or others against bacteria, viruses, germs, or other disease-causing organisms. Always clean and wash this product thoroughly before and after each use. So that might be something like a cutting board or something like that.
Okay.
All right.
And what about, go ahead. Well, what about viruses? They fall into this. Is that part of the exemption? I'm not sure I understand that part.
I don't think this was ever considered before COVID. And I think COVID set off a whole, chain of events that were somewhat unusual. And I think one of the things that happened with COVID was this marketing. You have to understand, COVID was a novel virus, right? We never had it before. So we never had that virus to test in a laboratory to determine if the existing products would work against it. However, when we had the novel virus, everyone wanted to get samples of this novel virus to get it into a lab so that they could test on it. They could prove their product would work. And, the government, what the government did, I think, was smart. What they did was there were initially two ways to get your product approved. The first was to demonstrate your product was effective against a pathogen that is harder to kill than SARS-CoV-2. I mean, that makes sense. If it'll kill something more difficult to kill, it should work on that. The second was to demonstrate efficacy against a different coronavirus similar to COVID. Also makes sense. And the third one is to actually have data against COVID. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Lysol was the first company that actually had the first legal claim against it.
Interesting. Okay.
All right.
So is there any other background we need to cover here, Cliff, before we move over and discuss the paper Tony's working on?
I don't think so at this point.
All right. Tony, any comments on what Cliff just went through?
I think Cliff gave a pretty good background on the regulatory actions, and probably the only thing that I would add is, when they do get your registration, there's a label that comes with the registration. You have to follow the label instructions, but there's a lot of information on that label too about what's actually been claimed and supported enough for them to make the claim in the first place. So if they're talking about killing mold versus killing bacteria, they have to actually have the lab data to show each of those, which goes back to the virus issue. There actually was, I know of one product that actually had some virus kill issue, both for SARS, the original SARS-CoV-1 back in 2004, 2003, 2004, and then one that actually had some feline viruses, which was a common one to actually use. But for the, for the SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19 agent, nobody saw it coming in terms of the high need that we were going to have for this, based off of what had happened with H1N1 as well as with SARS-CoV-1, which mainly stayed over in Asia, actually, and maybe a little bit into Canada.
Okay, I think another topic, Tony, we should cover kind of as the background is what is a log reduction?
So you could think of a log reduction as for every log number, log 1, 2, 3, put another 9 into the number. So a log 1 is a 90% reduction, a log 2 is a 99%, a log 3 is a 99.9, and a log 4 is a 99.99. And for those, it depends upon the regulation and the agency that gives you some of the descriptions of what those need to be. It could be anywhere between a 2 log and a 6 log reduction that you would need to have, depending upon what the use is and what you plan on intending to use it for.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the categories of these products. Can you give listeners a little more of an idea of what categories? We're talking about surface protectants, but I think there's many ways, there's at least a few ways to protect surfaces.
Yeah, so let's first talk about the idea that you clean and disinfect, and cleaning first and then disinfect. Most people, when you're looking at disinfect, you're looking for a very high kill rate, short time period. And that's what most people think about when you're putting something on a surface. For a protectant, you're really looking for 2 weeks, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 2 years out. You're looking for a much longer time period of effectiveness. Now, not the same level of effectiveness, but you're looking for a longer time period of effectiveness. For the purposes of the agents that I looked at, which started out as 7, I added 6 to them, and then C&W came back and added another 2. So I ended up with about 15 different agents that I tried grouping. And within inside of that, you could say there's a group that fits into the 0 to 30 days, a group that fits into the 30 to 90 days, and then there's like a 90 plus day grouping based off of generally the efficacy and how it's intended to be applied and how the labeling is actually set up. So you can group them in terms of how long they're intended to kind of last and give some level of efficacy. And then you can also group them by whether they're a liquid or whether they're a solid, or whether they're actually a solid that's put in place as a sheet or something like that over a surface, or something like copper. There's also some polymer-based films that I'll talk about here shortly. And those would be a solid type as opposed to a liquid spray. You can also group them by how they get applied, whether you can paint them on, roll them on, or whether you have to electrostatically spray them, how the application would be. So they do have some different ways of actually looking at, how you might want to group them. And then lastly, you look at what's the mechanism that they work by. So some of these, work essentially by the chemical aspects. Some of them work by more of a physico aspect of how they actually limit the growth or the transfer of these biological agents.
I find that interesting. I think we'll go into that in a little more detail later in the interview here, but I find that very interesting. I have a quick question. We're all familiar with these claims on, bathtubs or, the dehumidifiers the guys use, and either one of you can jump in on this. What do we have there? Again, it's something that's saying that it's got this protection to keep things from growing on that surface, and how are those applied?
It can either be built in, for instance, they have additives that are added to the plastics, and triclosan is a very, very common one. All the microban products, that was the original patent was adding triclosan to plastics. And then they have some that can be sprayed on, and they do that in certain times with textiles and things like that, where it could be a spray on or a dip treatment. And Tony may have some things to add to that as well.
Tony?
Yeah, so as Cliff mentioned, you can actually build some of these antimicrobials into the product material as you're doing it, whether that's a plastic or whether that's even a textile. It could be put onto the fibers or sprayed on afterwards, and they have various ways of doing that as well. And that's where actually a lot of the money is over the years has been putting them on products for product usage, not for application on surfaces in an office or in a hospital or something like that. Gotcha. What I'm going to be talking about mostly is going to be the ones that are applied after product production. So they're after you get a product, a desk, carpet, walls, elevator knobs. Those are all have already been installed, and you're looking to put a coating on or some type of protective to minimize the amount of microbial growth, the microbial actual deposition onto those surfaces as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the depth of the research you performed here and get a little more background on that, Tony. Tell listeners a little bit more about what you set out to do here and what the final product looks like.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can evaluate, and there's a lot of work that can be done. One of the big things I did is I looked at, of course, all of the registrations, EPA registration, because there's a lot of data in the label and the registration information if it's available. Now, some of these products don't need a registration, as Cliff pointed out at the beginning. If you got a particular article that can be exempt from that, then you don't actually need to do the EPA registration for that. So EPA registration was a key point, pulling up information, both publicly available and published reports, going to the CEOs, the chemists of a lot of these products, and actually getting on the phone with them and pinning them down with questions and trying to get some unpublished data, which of course obviously ends up with some NDAs to make sure that certain things can't be disclosed, and reviewing more of the detail, the laboratory data, the field data, which is also just, to me, the field data is more important than the lab data. Everything does great in the lab. You can make anything look good in the lab if you set it up right. Question is how does it actually perform out in the real world, and at what level does it perform out in the real world? So I wanted to take a look at taking along those same steps. What's the lab data? What's the field data? And even if it performs on the prevention side of things with regard to whether it's mold, whether it's a virus, whether it's a bacteria, then the next question becomes does it actually stop disease? Does it stop the transfer? You have that next step of what we might say hospital-acquired infections, which is one thing that gets tracked as well. So I went through a very long process of pulling up all the information I could, several hundred references, at least 200 hours of my time put into this, going through the products, talking with people, and trying to get a very good in-depth view of not just their products, but the overall general classifications on how they operate, so that I had the right questions to ask to make sure I knew, what were those products going to do when you put them in, when you actually made use of them, and could they be used in the same ways? So there's products out there, for instance, that the application is only electrostatic, which limits your ability to do things with it. So I wanted to look at what are the applications available as well. And there's a number of them that you can't use in an HVAC system. And if your label doesn't say you could use it in an HVAC system, don't use it in an HVAC system, because that is a violation. So a lot of background work.
Are there any that you can use in an HVAC system?
Yeah, there's coatings. Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably about 4 or 5 of these coatings that are stated for using an HVAC system. Now you would still have to apply it per the label, and there are some things that you would want to make sure you don't do. Like, I'm probably not going to put them on the coils of an HVAC unit. I mean, it might work for a short time, but you're going to cause some issues with regard to efficiency. You may cause some other issues as well with them. So they're not like you can just throw them anywhere you want. And we could talk about some of the other properties that you have to look at with regard to some of these products, which I did not look at. I was more looking at they're going to use them. What are they going to use them for? I wasn't necessarily looking at some of the material properties and how they affect other things, other than more the efficacy, the safety aspects. Can a person use it safely? Can they apply it safely? And how well is it going to work?
And how do they work, Tony? There's a few ways they work. Maybe we could review that now.
Yeah, so let me talk first about how you might group them. So the biggest grouping is what would be called cyquats. So those who are familiar with quaternary ammonium compounds, essentially what they've done is they've taken a quaternary ammonium compound, a quat, and they've bound it to a silane chain. And so if you think about something like a silicon, and then taking the chemical of the quat portion of it, binding it to the surface so that it's available for to the surface to actually cause damage to an organism. Most of these have really only been tested on bacteria, specific types of bacteria in general, as well as some of them have been tested against particular fungi. But the quats in general, they have their effectiveness, and it's one of essentially 3 ways. If you were to look at the data that's out there, there's a lot of companies like to say it's a micro sword, and it jabs into the bacteria and kills it. Well, there's some truth to that. And in essence, what that really means is the shape of the molecule itself allows it to stick out and go into and disrupt the cell surface, the outer layer of whatever it is, maybe a bacteria or maybe a fungus. And that's one mechanism, but can't explain everything. And so you'd have to go to a second mechanism, which those also function off of, which is an ion exchange mechanism, which causes some charge issues, which then disrupt the molecules. And then there's a phospholipid sponge effect that also creates some damage to some of these organisms. Now, those are 3 different mechanisms. They all kind of work for the cyquats, and probably at different levels based off of all the published evidence and some of the unpublished stuff that I'm aware of. So functionally, they have a somewhat chemical physical aspect, a very much a charge aspect, and then a very much a chemical aspect for the cyquats. But if you go into the metal ones, like copper or silver, they actually, the copper is known for releasing copper ions or having the copper available there, and then actually generating a reactive oxygen species, which then disrupts the cellular process and then causes the cell to actually die. So that's a different type of functionality. The silver actually does it by binding with some of the sulfur components of the cell walls itself, which then actually disrupt and eventually kill it. So those actually have different functionary ways of actually working. And then if you want to look at photocatalytic oxidation, these films that you could put over surfaces, those typically have a titanium dioxide layer. That titanium dioxide layer with UV light, high light source, then produces a reactive oxygen species that can actually then react with the organism and eventually kill the organism. Now, there's obviously some limitations to what it can do, and whether or not that's been proven for field usage as well. Then there's these physical structure materials, which are actually designed to do a couple of things. One is don't let the organism attach to the surface in the first place, which means that if you're going to have something on there, it doesn't get on there in the first place, and then it's not available for transfer. It's also not available for growth. And then limit the actual biofilm growth potential over time by not allowing it to actually spread itself out and multiply. And those physically structured ones are kind of interesting. And actually, Joe, let me do a screen share here for a second.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that'll help.
And let me go back first to what Cliff had already talked about with susceptibility of these organisms to disinfectants. And you notice that, these bacterial spores, Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus magitarium, spore formers are the toughest to kill up at the top. Then your mycobacteria, your non-enveloped viruses, your fungi, your bacteria, and then your enveloped viruses, which is where SARS-CoV-2 lies. And so those are actually the easiest to kill. And so when Cliff talked about if you can kill the spore formers and you can kill the fungi and the gram-negative bacteria, you should have no problem with the viruses. And that was pretty much one of the mechanisms behind making those choices that EPA actually went ahead and made. These quaternary ammonium compounds, there's basically a positive nitrogen sitting in there, and some of this charge effect is what actually helps with the antimicrobial aspect of it, and that can be attached onto a silane and kept on the surface so that when the material touches the surface, this organism touches the surface, it's a contact kill. Now, it's important to recognize that contact kill is very important in terms of the spacing. It's literally got to touch it. It's got to physically touch it, and just a small amount will make a difference. And I can talk about that in a little while. In terms of the contact killing, this is the example of the swords. If it's a nice flat biocide up here, it can't enter the cell wall. Versus if it's immobilized and has some space in between it, it can get further into the cell wall and be able to actually do some damage. And then if you look at the sponge effect, you can actually have some effect of this anion cation back and forth aspect to be able to disrupt the cell wall itself. So those are the two ways that I mentioned previously. And then the physical way. So this is an scanning electron micrograph that I took of a sharklet. And sharklet's a trade name for a material that basically is a particular imprinted pattern based off of what's on the surface of a shark. And this surface material is such that it does not allow bacteria to actually adhere to it very well. And in addition to reducing coefficient of drag, but it also doesn't allow it to grow very well. This particular material here not only has some laboratory testing of that nature, it has field testing and has shown that if you use it on certain surfaces, you decrease the number of hospital-acquired infections. So this would be a physical mechanism. And Joe, you'd asked earlier about the whole idea of bending. This is an uneven surface. And if you took a bacteria of the right size, and you can see my scale bar down here, 10 micrometers, you took a bacteria of the right size, if it folds in there and gets any little pressure against it, it's gonna distort across the surface and bend it and create perhaps enough compression and tension. Compression is probably not going to do anything to the cell wall, but the tension aspect is actually going to fracture a portion of the cell wall or open it up for attack by something else. And so that's the stress aspect of this. Again, it's probably the third one that's on here in terms of how this mechanism how this particular property works. It's really not allowing it to stick and not allowing it to transfer that actually this particular physical-based pattern works. And so you've got the contact kill. You may have a leachability surface, which they no longer use these because they don't want silver and copper and other things leaching out. And then you've got perhaps a surface that repels. So you can actually take some of those cyquats and make them hydrophobic or hydrophilic. And therefore you can actually, make use of them in other ways, but you can also repel the surface in general. And then with that sharklet surface, you can repel the actual deposition of the bacteria to begin with. So multifunctionary ways, and not all of them are the same. And a lot of the work that's been done has been done on bacteria, not necessarily on viruses. And there's probably only been a lesser amount on the fungi themselves.
I do have a follow-up question in regard to the titanium dioxide products and so on and so forth. I'm sure that you're familiar that when they first came out, I think it may have come from Japan, and they were using this technology on the outside of buildings, and they were saying that it would help buildings remain clean. Have you done any research, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, actually, I was wanting to call up a colleague of mine because they did a nice study where they took the outside of the building and they coated half of it and they left the other half coated. And after a few years, you can actually see the color difference where the growth was on one side and there was no growth on the other side. And so from that aspect, yeah, it's pretty dramatic on the outside. You can reduce the growth on the outside and also make it a pre-washing where it actually, as the rain comes down, it'll help wash the surface off. Mm-hmm. And you get some additional benefits because you actually get some moisture kept off of the surface. Because a lot of those organisms, particularly the algae, will hold the moisture in there. And when you hold that moisture into the building wall, you actually increase, or I should say, you decrease the resistivity of that material. And so you get a lot of heat loss, actually, no such thing as cold loss, heat loss back and forth, which means you lose energy. And you can actually, if you use some of these coatings, you'll get a radiative response difference, and you'll get an energy gain in terms of the amount of energy you don't have to use to heat and cool the building just because of resisting that moisture penetration.
Very interesting. I think we're going to go to halftime.
Our marquee sponsor, Instascope. More jobs done faster with the future of IAQ assessment technology. Unlimited samples, instant results, and cloud-based data at instascope.co. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World at AIHA.org. ACGIH, Advancing Careers of Professionals in Environmental Health, Industrial Hygiene, and Safety, interested in defining their science at ACGIH.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute, see more deeply through science and research at CIRIScience.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association, promoting the exchange of indoor environmental quality information through education and research at IAQA.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry, network with leaders at restorationindustry.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at IICRC.org. And Healthy Buildings America 2021 in Honolulu, Hawaii, November 9 through 11 at hb2021-america.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories, free shipping, great pricing, same-day results with no rush fee at aemlinc.com. Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us at particlesplus.com. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, over 20 years manufacturing accurate, reliable IAQ instrumentation for portable, short-term, and continuous monitoring at graywolfsensing.com. TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online magazine for industry professionals and consumers at healthyindoors.com.
Okay. Tony, let's talk about some of the material properties. You looked at a really diverse group of different materials, and in certain situations that the deciding factor may be based on a combination of efficacy and performance and some type of specific material property. So if you could speak on that, appreciate it.
Yeah, so for the most part, a lot of these were liquid coatings and the rest were solids that you would apply to a surface or were solids themselves. Obviously, the solids have a better wear capacity, and so they'll last better. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the efficacy off of it, because that wear may actually mean getting rid of the surface that you want. Now, it's not the case with the copper material, because you keep on replenishing the copper because of the way it's embedded into the material. There's a number of things that I looked at, but I didn't actually do rankings or true evaluation. I kept them in the back of my head, but there are some properties that are important to look at that I did not look at when I graded these materials. So what are the acoustics of once you apply it to it? What's the resistivity value if you're putting it on a wall? How long does it last in terms of wear resistance? What's the flame spread, smoke development? Because you're putting these on a variety of different surfaces, and if something happens, you don't want it to actually cause you more harm than good. What's the heat aging with load? Most of these, fortunately, are designed to be applied inside as opposed to being outside. One of the coatings is actually a paint. It actually can be applied outside and has very good kill capacity. But other than that, most of them are intended to be used inside, and as such, their wear capacity is also limited. So you don't expect them to be sitting around for 2 years later. They will wear down, and they'll actually get dust and debris on them, which is a big issue. And Cliff, you and I have talked about this. What's the benefit of having one of these things, and if you get something on the surface of it? And I'm going to go ahead and do a little screen share again here, because I think it's important to take a look at. One of the things that I did look at, and Jonathan, if you want to take my video off and just leave the audio, I have here an image of what's called a polycarbonate filter that we use for air sampling. And these little round circles that you're actually seeing in here are holes through this polycarbonate filter. And there's a starch grain on one, and there's actually a rat hair on one, and a hair from an underside of a leaf on this one. So this is on a typical polycarbonate filter. Here we have a dextrane grain, which happens to have come out of a frozen beer. So when you freeze your beer, and the dextrin comes out of it, and that's what makes it taste all nasty and gritty. But just to give you a size of those little bitty grains compared to the size of the holes of the polycarbonate filter, they're 10 micrometers wide. And then here we have an image of a diatom with that hole over to the left. And you can see right through that hole. The thickness of this filter is actually 10 micrometers. And there was a wonderful study done that showed that if you use a polycarbonate filter like this and put bacteria on top of it, the underlying protective coating does nothing. It does not kill the bacteria. It needs a contact surface. It really does need that contact in order to kill it. It's not just going to, exude some vapor and actually do something that's going to actually prevent that bacteria from both living and growing.
How many of the different coatings that you looked at had the capability to be self-cleaning?
Let's define self-cleaning, Joe. Cliff, one of the two, we talked about this, how self-cleaning. You can't self-clean these coatings unless they're on the side of an exterior of a building where you get to rain wash them all the time. Okay. With these coatings, you still have to clean. You can't just put them on there and expect them to continue working, as I just showed right there. 10 micrometer worth of dust, which is pretty much nothing. That doesn't take very much. Mm-hmm. Once that dust gets on there, it prohibits the coating from actually doing its job. And so if you get any significant amount of dust deposit on there, it needs to be cleaned off. And that happens on a regular basis, which is one of the reasons I have issues with the photocatalytic oxidation devices in general. As soon as you get dust on them, they're not going to operate well. You need that surface contact. You need that reactionary aspect. And if it doesn't get it, it's not going to be very usable. So keeping the surfaces cleaned even after you've applied a coating is important. You'll get some pretty good efficacy if you don't have a lot of dust and debris settling on it. And some of the field studies I looked at with some of these, after 90 days, you're going to get we have about 40% reduction versus not treating the area, maybe a 60% reduction in some places. So it's not the log 3 kill of 99.99. It's less than 1 log. It's not even 90%. Typically these longer-term products in the 30 to 90 day usage are only going to give you a 40 to 60% reduction in usually bacteria, and it's typically measured by ATP. A lot of times they haven't done it with regard to actual bacteria or fungal growth. The exception to that actually is Microban, which I am going to name as a product that's been out there the longest. It's got the most history with something. And it actually it's done pretty well over 60-month periods. A lot of these other ones, when they're actually tested, if you read the fine print, they reapplied it every 30 days or 90 days. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like it's going to last a year. They reapplied it every 90 days for a year. And that's why it worked, is because they were doing a reapplication. And if you're using it in a hospital, which is where a lot of the studies come from, you're cleaning the surfaces. Whether that's a typical clean or a terminal clean, you're going to be cleaning the surfaces on a regular basis. And if you don't, you're going to build up that dust level or debris level, and you're not going to have that contact kill capacity on that surface. So it's very important to recognize that you got to clean the surfaces. You can't just put them down and leave them there and think, I don't have to worry about it.
One of the things that I thought was that with all the hoopla about going in and spraying all these disinfectants and, the electrostatic spraying, these buildings top to bottom and so on and so forth, there was really nothing left after the dwell time of the product. After the product dries, there was no lingering protection whatsoever. And I do think that, I support the use of these products because I do think that they provide some sort of protection. Maybe less than a log, but something is better than nothing. And at least, the customer gets something other than dwell time, in terms of efficacy.
Yeah, well, there's an assumption that you got the dwell time to begin with, which has been an issue, and I think in the industry in general, that they haven't allowed proper dwell time. There's also the, you mentioned it, they evaporate pretty quickly, but if you actually look at the dispersion of it across a surface, unless you get the right distance away from the surface when you're doing electrostatic, you're not going to get enough coverage to begin with anyway. And after they leave, they hold a place in that they're not a panacea. They're an incremental improvement. They're not fabulous, but they're incremental. And the question is do you want a little bit of more rather than regular? And in a hospital, it can be beneficial to do that. And so the question is does it make sense on an economic basis? Does it make sense on making sure that if you're the one in that building and you're offering a high class building, class A space, and they want to have it at a certain level, does it make sense to do that? Because that's what the expectation is. So there's a level of grades. It's a continuum. And the question is where do you want to lie on that continuum with regard to both risk and presentation of what you are doing for to maintain the space in a healthy condition? That does depend upon risk. A lot of these work really well because if you're testing them in a hospital, that's a high risk area. It's easy to show a difference in a high risk area than it is in a lower risk area. I've done the numbers, and if you look at it, you think about it, with the cases, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of, there was about, at the peak, I think we were at 6 people in 1,000 had the virus. So, your chances of actually having a significant need for it, particularly if you're spaced out in an office, probably isn't there. Now, there's other benefits to these, Cliff, that you and I have talked about. Reduction of MRSA, reduction of some of these viruses that are very surface contact issues. And so there's benefits on that side as well that nobody's talking about because everybody's focusing on SARS-CoV-2. So yeah, there's things that you can do with regard to that. Ed Light in his little chat here has posted an idea. What about the soil loading and the testing for EPA? Well, the typical testing may or may not include the adding of a particular mix to mimic some type of fluid, not necessarily soil, but typically some type of inhibitor to keep you from being able to kill the organism to begin with. And that may be some type of broth that they would put in there.
Blood, yeah.
Or blood or something like that, just to keep you during the testing process. Soil is typically not done because soil is really good at preventing it from working. You'd have to go to a disinfectant for it to actually work. And so from that standpoint, you have to match the testing to the field, which is why as I say, go to the field test. Does it work in the field? It can work in the lab pretty well, but does it actually work in the real world where you're actually trying to apply it?
So what are the big take-homes here, Tony, from this? And then if we get a chance, folks, we will jump into some of these other questions.
So if you look at the criteria that I set aside, you have the different things that Cliff and I have both talked about. Is it EPA registered? What's the effective time? Do you have field studies? Do you have the application? And do you have the technical expertise? Beyond that, you have to ask yourself, what's the maximum time period I could use it? And as a take-home, I'd have to say, there is no silver bullet. There's no awe-inspiring antimicrobial that's going to do it. You're going to get probably a 40 to 60% reduction if you're looking for like a 90-day add-on. And if not, you're really only getting you're not getting you're getting something less than what you expect. So don't expect it to be something fabulous. Expect it to be an add-on, a little incremental movement towards reducing the bioburden, the overall bioburden itself.
All right. What do you think? Let's go to the roundup, Cliff.
You got it.
All right, Tony, I got a text question here that's kind of long, but I think maybe I'll just go to the end. Did IAQ considerations enter into your evaluation or your recommendations?
So there are some safety considerations that are quasi IQ that went into the considerations. And Joe, I don't know whether you posted the link to the actual public version of what was in my report.
I'll put it in the blog.
Will in the blog
okay.
And on the website.
I just wasn't sure if I was permitted to do it. So,
well, the public version you could talk about.
Okay, no problem. Understood.
The non-public, no.
Understood.
And there's some criteria in there, and if you want to look at that, there's actually a criteria on safety, health, and then application side that went into that. However, I did not look at things like odor issues that might be associated with the product. If you're looking for reducing long-term odor issues, you may have some things to deal with regard to that. I also didn't necessarily consider somebody who might be copper sensitized to the surfaces. And so if you've got a copper surface, they may very well react to the copper surface just because they react to copper in general. I took a look at that, but it did play a big factor in terms of how I rank them. I do have some data on it, but it didn't fall into the ranking scheme that I was looking to do for the client at the time.
All right. Cliff, final questions?
Go ahead. You and Pete.
Well, let's go to Pete. The restoration industry global watchdog, Pete Consigli. Pete, questions for our guest today, Tony Havics.
Well, it's not so much a questions. I just think that the topic obviously is important and timely, not just in light of all the business with the COVID, but I mean, this has been an issue that, Cliff and myself and many others in the industry have talked about for a long time. And I think that there's just misunderstanding, I guess, of the proper use and application of these different products. And too often, the suppliers get involved in different distributors of these products, and they make it a they kind of get involved in, about the special interests of a particular product. And I would think, as an industry, we need to get above that. We need to deal with understanding the law, the real consequences of not using these products properly and not using the right product. It has big implications. And I guess if I added anything to this, Joe and Tony, we talked a little bit about this, before we went live. But one of the things, the lessons that should be learned, I noticed in just looking at all the people that called in today, and thanks a lot for everyone that called in, that we got a wide range of people from restoration, and we got the industrial hygienist type, and we got some of the old guys who've been around for a long time. We got some of the younger restorers on there, and crossover people like William Coleman from the flooring industry and all these kind of things. So this is an important topic. But I remember specifically in the 90s, one of the lessons that was learned is that in the very early 90s, when the industries first started to put some standards together, we really didn't have our arms around this issue. And then in the late 90s, when the second IACRC S500 document came out, which was written in an ANSI style, meaning in a format, but we hadn't got the ANSI yet. That didn't happen until the third edition several years later. And it had a much broader inclusion of people that were involved in that process, including some on this call from multiple industries. But something that was very unique and special in that document was in the appendix. It was a 14-page appendix, and it was a legal opinion on the FIFA laws by Mark Hansen, who's the attorney for the IICRC, and really a wonderful man to work with all those years that he was involved in a lot of the committee work. He really brought logic and to a lot of this. He wrote a 14-page document and explained to the industry what FIFA was, the importance of it. But to this day, 20 plus years later, I still remember his conclusion at the end of the 14 pages. And it was a short paragraph, but I very specifically remember this, Mr. Zlotnick, and I know it will go into the blog. He said, it's important for the industry to be in compliance with the FIFA law, because violation of the FIFA not only has the health implications and legal and liability implications, but it's a violation which could bring criminal charges, to paraphrase. And the difference between a civil action, as many of you know, even though we're not lawyers, but we get involved in contracts and dealing with this, is a civil action has financial penalties. A criminal action can have financial penalties, and also you can go to jail. And so that was 20 some odd years ago that was in our industry standard as an appendix by the lawyer who represented our industry standards organization. He said, you guys need to pay attention to this, because not only is it the right thing to do, you could violate it, it could have criminal penalties. So here we are all these years later, and still talking about it. Absolutely. And I guess we'll continue to talk about it because it's important.
Yep.
And anyway, and so as far as that's concerned, Tony, I really appreciate the wonderful work you've done on our shows.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Pete. Hey, Tony, before we go, and this ties in a little bit to the questions, there's other variables. I don't know if you got the chance to talk about, but I lost my internet there for a while, but things like material properties, acoustics, R value, and how these products affect flame spread, smoke development, toxicity, how removable are they? Do they leach? And tying into what Ed Light put in the text box here, what about in the presence of water? What happens to these? Now, obviously, we can't cover all that right now, but I wonder if you maybe have some overview of what you learned about those different topics during this process?
We covered a lot of it, Joe, when you were off. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
But
okay.
Yeah, we did cover a lot of it. I mean, probably the bottom line is nobody's looking at it right now. I mean, I've looked a little bit, but most people are not looking at it with regard to the processes. Ed had put it in the chat with regard to, what does water do to some of these surfaces? It depends. And he mentioned that Microban calls itself self-cleaning. It might be self-cleaning if you put it on the exterior of a building and let it rain on it, but it's not really self-cleaning. I would point out that there is a concern that with the use of chemicals that you're building up chemical resistance to certain, you're building certain resistant organisms by selectively removing certain ones and allowing other ones to grow. And that's still being studied, although it doesn't appear to be as bad as most people think. And then one last thing is that AIHA has a cleaning and disinfection guide that's made for the healthcare industry. It's got a pretty good background. The next go around, I volunteered to add some of this information into that document, which will hopefully be updated in another year or two.
Okay. And before we go, anything final you'd like to add, Tony? Anything, maybe you could give us a little clue on other interesting things you're working on right now?
222 nanometer UV, which will eventually be coming around into the industry. Just questions with regard to that, but there's a number of things that still have to be answered with these coatings, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And so there's things that are still going on right now, and we'll continue on. And as I come up across things, I'll give you a call, Joe, and see if we can't get back on.
I'm also wondering real quick, how did this? How did your client react? Do you know if they made any changes to their processes and or their, the way they treat the buildings based on your review here?
They did. They took it to heart and realized where they don't need to spend as much time doing certain things, and they wanted to use other products in other ways. We actually excluded some products. Some of them because of poor care, poor customer service by the company. Some of them because they couldn't prove that they actually worked. And we had a conversation with one of the companies. Actually, we had a conference call with one of the companies, and they were not real happy about what I had to say about their product. And I said, well, just show me the money. Where's your proof? Show me your proof, and I'm good with you. We'll work through that. And they couldn't. And at that point, I got a phone call from my client after the conference call and said, thank you for basically sticking to your guns, because we need to know whether it was real or not.
Absolutely.
Are they using something in the buildings, Tony?
They're using a number of different products.
Good.
There are some ones that they have a greater a liking to than other ones. Mm-hmm. And then we've also looked at a couple products outside of the U.S. because Canada is a little different. Mm-hmm. And so we have a product that's being used in Canada, mm-hmm. and then actually another one in Australia. It's also a cycwad.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Tony Havics, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on IAQ Radio Plus. I want to thank Tony, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, put a lot of time into this one. The restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. John, you got to have faith at the controls. Our excellent sponsors, thank you so much for being sponsors and allowing us to continue to do the show. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners. We will be back next Friday at noon with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus. I think that's the Ralph Moon Show, by the way, on ATP. An excellent show. You don't want to miss that one.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.